Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm delighted to be chatting with filmmaker and one of our own wonderful contributors, Aoife Kelleher, about her wonderful documentary, Mrs. Robinson, which is in cinemas now. Have a listen back to the trailer here.
I remember spending a lot of time looking out this window. I would look out on the river from my bedroom and dream dreams. There were dreams about making life fairer.
Mary is the most indefatigable woman I have ever met.
This strong, feisty, spirited person that goes in and fights for people that need support.
I'm not sure anybody can keep up with them. She must be Irish.
There comes a time where an individual has to take a stand and be prepared to pay a price for taking that stand.
The Emerald Isle has its first woman president.
The women of Ireland who, instead of rocking the cradle, rocked the system.
I have decided to name Mrs. Mary Robinson High Commissioner for Human Rights.
I was going to try and make a difference and speak truth to power.
I have fight for climate justice. It's for the children around the world.
Mary Robinson has not only shown a light on human suffering, but illuminated a better future for our world.
I suppose I would like to be remembered as somebody who saw the need for change during her life and tried to make as much change as possible. I said, look, I'm too young to be president of anything. She said, Mary, this isn't about f***ing you.
So thank you so much for chatting with us. It was so lovely to see Mrs. Robinson.
Not at all. I'm delighted. So much warmth for Film Ireland. So I'm really delighted to be speaking to you today.
Oh, we're thrilled. We're thrilled to have you. Oh my God. Your back catalogue of films, they're really ones that capture something very special. Like, you seem like you're on a roll, and this is certainly following in that trend of like the one that means so much to Irish society that like people hold on to. I'd like to talk about actually your career first, and kind of what brings you to make documentaries and TV and commercials. Can you talk to me a little bit about starting and how you found your way here?
Absolutely. I mean, like it was quite a sudden left turn, a bit of a handbrake turn actually, going into film and broadcasting. So I was kind of, my mum was really pushing me to do law, and I thought I was going to do English. And then at the very last minute, so my now sister-in-law, Anna Rogers, who made How to Tell a Secret. So she was in DIT Ainger Street, and she was doing her final year film. And I went in and helped out and thought, oh my God, it's far more creative and exciting than anything I had planned for myself. So sitting in with the work that she was doing ended up being really formative. And I went to Ainger Street then and thought that I would, well, again, I kind of every intention of working in drama, but almost immediately after graduating began working in documentary. And that has just been, so fulfilling, really, So I directed a series called Growing Up Gay for RT1. That began in 2008. So that was about 4 years after I graduated, and was broadcast in 2010. And that was actually Anna Rogers produced that. And I've just been directing ever since. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to be doing.
I attended a screening that there was such love for your film in there. And I think there was such this overwhelming sense of appreciation for your work, which again, filmmakers don't always get, like it's like that kind of like immediate response, which is very hopeful for the release. It's very, very exciting. Do you feel like working from broadcast, in a way, you're probably guaranteed to have more, to impact more people with your stories in terms of viewership? Like film maybe is more specific. You'll get people, but there are people that are there to love film that like opt in for this one experience. But with broadcast, you're kind of touching people that maybe might necessarily, like a much kind of broader spectrum of people that maybe aren't initially as engaged too much. And then you're kind of dragging them in and sharing a perspective. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you feel like the forms are different, or do you think about a project differently going into it?
Absolutely. I mean, the focus on, when you're making a film for cinema, I mean, the first thing you're thinking about is, how it's going to play on a big screen, the visual components, how to make it cinematic. You're going to want it to be, kind of a bit of a grand narrative that, that kind of tells a large story, which doesn't, which isn't to say that it always has to be, a biopic of a major political figure or, anything like that. It can be something really kind of niche. It can be a really kind of, thinking like films like, The Pipe that was produced by Rachel Isett, who produced 1 Million Dubliners. I mean, you can have these kind of David and Goliath stories, but I think they have to speak to, whether it's a wider issue or in society or, almost like a kind of a foreshadowing of something that's coming around the line. I think that you do. I mean, it's about bigger narratives. It's about kind of cinematic visuals. It's about kind of making something that will sustain, 90 minutes of, uninterrupted viewing in a dark room, and then maybe in I think for broadcast, then you want to, you're thinking of pace and keeping people's attention in a world full of distractions, So I suppose there are those slight shifts. I mean, of course, you want to make, the documentaries that you make for television cinematic, and of course, you pay attention to pace in the context of, what you're making for cinema. I mean, I like to think I bring the same sensibility to both, but I do think there are slightly different demands.
For something for broadcast, what would the focus be there? Is that like human stories? Is it about gripping people quickly? Is it about the longer form? Like what are the kind of the contrasts to it?
I mean, often it can be as simple as budget, and often, I mean, when you're really determined to tell a story, sometimes it's about, the platform that becomes available. So for example, I'd never made radio documentaries before, but when Magellan Moynihan came to me with her story, I really wanted to get it out there, and I really wanted to kind of go with the timeline that Magellan wanted. She'd reached a point where she really wanted to talk about her experience in the Guards, the fact that she'd been pressurized into giving her son up for adoption. And I felt that it was a story that could be cinematic, or, that absolutely would have sustained a television documentary. But because it's, it takes longer and longer now to kind of bring funding together from all the different kind of quarters, I went with radio, which I had never done before, and which was an absolute micro budget, so that, because Radio 1 said they'd give us the funding and that they'd give us a platform. So I mean, it depends. Sometimes it's about where you can get the story out, and sometimes it's about kind of, the demands of a particular narrative.
Okay, so that's it. It's sort of like everything is you take it as it comes. That's different. I think that is so interesting, because at the end of the day, everything is storytelling, but it's such different forms. And I do want to, even your experience sort of like putting together funding. So I know this was touched on last night in the Q&A, and I thought this was very interesting that you were saying it's hard to get funding for certain stories, and like it just takes time to kind of put things together. Is that because the stories are so big, you're working with different funds and accessing them? Is that you have to wait for the right time for the right story? How have you found, like, I presume everything is different, but even I presume you don't want to get into specifics, but even like a generalized description of, like, areas that have been easier to source, and maybe some of the technicalities of it, because like you've told so many important stories so well. I think as someone who's an outsider looking, you like 1 Million Dubliners just spoke to so many people. Like this film will mean, you can see it in the audience, will mean so much to people, and like it's interesting to see that struggle, because I think people, see a finished product and think, oh yeah, that's all there was to it.
Absolutely. I mean, so I'm making a documentary now about the Justice for Magdalene's campaign. And it's a good example because I started trying to get funding for that, or started working on that in 2015. So it took 9 years to go from concept to production there, which is a long time.
And tricky time-wise, because there's a ticking clock on of all things, like especially that.
I mean, I think I've spoken a bit about the fact that, I have definitely found it, certainly not impossible, but it has definitely taken longer to put together the funding for stories that center around women or that have women at the heart of their narrative. And in that regard, like I can only speak for myself there. And I'm sure if you speak to other directors, I mean, lots of directors have made, extraordinary work around kind of female-centric stories. But yeah, I've definitely found it harder to get funding. So for, it felt like the process was going to be long for Magella. So, rather than waiting, we went with radio. And the Justice for Magdalene's doc, it took 9 years, and even Mrs. Robinson took a long time to get funded. So yeah, I mean, you just have to gauge it and decide, well, are you willing to, like, the Justice for Magdalene's documentary is really, it's a bit of a labor of love. And, when you take something like that on, you think, okay, well, I'm committing to this for the long haul, and I'm just going to see it all the way through, and we're going to try and go for, the whole shebang, cinemas, everything. But that's not always going to be, that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to let things go. Sometimes you have to decide that you're going to go with another platform, so you just have to decide, are you willing to commit to this for a decade if necessary? And you can't do that for every single project.
And do you feel like one project opens doors, or do you feel like if the next project, if it's slightly different, so 1 million Dubliners would have been a kind of different theme and spoke to different, like, people in a different way? I mean, there are so many links, but do you feel like that if you're like a project about maybe activism and women's rights, almost like you have to prove yourself and again in a way that if you were doing something that you had just done, maybe it would be easier to get funding? Or do you just think it's that is just an area that is always difficult too?
I mean, I think it's fair enough that, even if, I mean, I think that, of course, if people, are aware of your previous work, I mean, that has to count for something. But I do think it's fair enough that you have to some degree, begin again and really, successfully pitch the project to funders. I mean, I would love to feel that I could kind of coast in on the basis of previous work, but it should be a meritocracy, and it should be necessary to kind of to kind of really convince people that your idea is worth making. Sometimes I wish it was a little bit easier, or it didn't take quite so long, but I mean, fair is fair.
And more so as well, like if you just say you have drama shorts as well, like such a different medium. Did you find that like that helped you in terms of getting other work? What I'm asking is more about like a career progression, and how do you find, like, certainly you've so many projects in a pot that you're trying to get off the line. Is it a case of like you have a goal, you want to do these things? Is it a case of these are the stories and you're carrying them until you get to a certain point? It's kind of more like, how do you find that workflow? How many things are bubbling up at a time? And even going from drama to documentaries, was that a natural shift?
So in the drama projects that I'm interested in, and I've worked a bit with Treasure on developing a project, for example, and I mean, there are certain kind of stories that that appeal to me, and I think that that's true across documentary and drama. So there are particular subject matters there, and there I like the idea of I don't think I'm ever going to be directing Fast and the Furious or anything like that. I think there are, like, I think I'm really interested in kind of women's stories. I'm really interested in stories from the LGBT community. I'm really interested in kind of, maybe social issues and social activism. And I think that that's true across, documentary, drama, television and radio. I mean, definitely, yeah, I'd love to work more in drama, and it's always a joy when I get the opportunity, and absolutely it is hugely different. It's a wonderful intellectual exercise working with actors, and it's always kind of fun and engaging and creative and inspiring, and the being able to spend more time contemplating visuals and all of that. So I mean, there are, again, it's very much a different medium, but I love it. I love working in drama, and I do think that there are definitely running themes across all of the work.
In terms of, say, project flow, Is it that you have like a kind of pool of stories that you're always collecting and working on, and then one comes to fruition? Or are you very strategic in the one that you pick next? Or is it just when the money comes?
I think it's just worth the money.
Yeah.
Like, so as in, you have kind of like a set of ideas, and they're all at kind of different stages. And I would love to say that there's a very kind of strategic workflow and that it's very consistent and beautifully planned out. But actually, that's not the case at all, which is why, there was a set of years where I didn't make a feature at all, which was not to say that I didn't have ideas or that I wasn't pitching or that there wasn't work in development. But it kind of happens when it happens. And, I mean, it's hard to be strategic actually. And you just, yeah, I mean, I lecture now, which I've found wonderful, and me, it allows me, it means that if the timeline kind of slows a little bit on, something that I have in development, or, it means that it's not, my entire life doesn't come to a standstill or whatever. So it's, so I mean, lecturing in addition to directing, it takes the pressure off the timeline, and it means that, if something is delayed by a few months, it's not a disaster.
And one of the things actually you spoke about going from drama to documentaries, and we'll dig into Mrs. Robinson now because like it's so beautiful, it's so poignant. Dear God, the film it boils like a lifetime of shifts and power dynamic, and like with all the most iconic people that have ever existed in the world, told through like one of the most warmest and beautiful protagonists you ever had the opportunity to witness. Like what an amazing, generous woman in terms of what she has done in her life and what she has achieved, and like with such grace and such poise and such like integrity, and even the warts and all elements of it. So it's so powerful. I was like, dear God, is that fertile for a crown-like series? It's such fertile ground. Oh my God, think of all the like A-listers you'd have to be playing like Nelson Mandela and the Queen.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's always fascinating to, to get the chance to kind of look behind the scenes. I mean, that was an extraordinary time in Irish politics, the changes that were going on, the changes in representation, the changes with regards to kind of Anglo-Irish relations and North-South, this kind of emergence of Ireland as a more kind of outward looking country, as opposed to one that was really kind of focused on this post-colonial identity, shifts in leadership, and so it's an extraordinary time. I mean, the history of it, and for me, one of my favorite aspects of it was this emerging women's liberation movement. So the chance to speak to, I mean, it was wonderful to speak to Richard Branson and Peter Gabriel and Christiana Figueres, but I found it really exciting to speak to Maureen de Burca and Rosita Sweetman. I mean, Maureen de Burca, this extraordinary firebrand. Her life is so interesting. She was like, that term about, getting into good trouble is absolutely epitomized in the woman that is Maureen de Burca, and her protests, her activism on behalf of women's liberation, and the role that Mary Robinson played in that. So she basically fought for the right of women to sit on juries in relation to a court case where Maureen de Burca was the defendant. So that period is so fascinating, and I'd been aware just from working in television, of that extraordinary footage of the contraceptive train and, these amazing women kind of daring the police to arrest them. And getting the chance to sit with that and kind of meet some of the people involved, and, talking about Mary Robinson's role as basically the kind of, legal advisor to that movement. It was just that I felt was really exciting. And, I'd love to return to that era in Irish history.
and I must say, actually, that kind of brings up a point that we'll kind of dive more into later, but I did definitely want to bring it up. It's so funny. Your visual language in the pacing and editing and shot choices had the audience in the stitches. So there'd be a piece of dialogue, and then the visuals, like it would be like leaning towards something, and the visual aspect would be like a load of grumpy old men, and you'd cut to that scene and it would be the grumpiest man. Like like it felt like there was so much visual gags and timing and pacing, like it was actually quite comedic and pointed at times, that the language is there so much, that there's so much sort of joy and humor in the way that you present it. Do you find like that's a voice that you cultivated over time? Is that was that just very specifically suited to the kind of topics of it?
Think that, I mean, it's kind of like anything. I think that at the time, that level of, church involvement in society, that level of, kind of church state kind of imposition in the private lives of citizens, like at the time, that experience is not funny at all. And I do think it's a case of, tragedy plus time equals comedy, those kind of arch conservative figures and the power they try to wield over the average person. And in this case, generally, often the average woman or the average kind of gay man. Like in retrospect, you just think, how dare they? And I mean, it can feel like the extent of the power they wielded was so extraordinary that almost the only response decades later is to go, how bizarre. It's almost like, I mean, it's very similar to kind of the language that, for example, the Democrats are using now in the American presidential election, that when you try to discuss it earnestly, it almost, it doesn't quite translate. But when you use terms like weird, that there's something very effective in that. There's something like it's almost like the most effective way to deal with that overreaching of power is a kind of a lampooning of it, is a kind, it can be the strongest critique, I think.
That is so true, because the most aggressive bullies are always hurt the most by belittling them. And I kind of think like, okay, like these are very specific points about really horrific points of our past. But I think it's a very powerful tool, because again, you've had a lot of people laughing, and I think that's it. It's the, like, you see it as well in the anger. Like there's so much anger in Irish society as to what we went through, especially as women, especially like, I mean, our reproductive rights are still not fully in place after how many years? Like, I mean, it's there on paper, but it's not there in practice. And that is so historically inbuilt into the ingrained systems that are there. So we are still fighting, that still exists. And then to see that, to be reminded in such a kind of visceral way as to where things were in 1990 is so powerful. So, but I think that humor and that wryness makes it much more palatable, and there's a joy because we know where it's going. But it's also about your voice as a filmmaker. Like in terms of that, do you feel like that is a style that you've developed that you would have as maybe your style, that you would say like, this is my language as a filmmaker, this is something that would be there? Or is it just specific to this story?
I mean, I think that in everything I've done, actually, there's even when it's, very dark, is that like I love capturing the humor, because I do think there is a connection between humor and resilience. So this idea that, in the darkest of times, people can show extraordinary resilience, but also through, a sense of humor. So, and I think that that's true across 1 Million Dubliners, across all of my work. I do think that there is that light and shade, and I definitely don't like to be too earnest. Even, I'm definitely drawn to maybe darker issues at times, but I do think it's important, not to, to kind of cut through a little bit with, with something arch, with something wry, with something funny, because, I think that that's what we do as, that's what certainly we as Irish people do all the time is, no matter what we're dealing with, that, we like to step back a bit and, and like have a joke about it, or, make a wry observation that, that can kind of lighten the moment.
I actually didn't even know half, or like you know it, you don't really observe it or like take it in about Mary and her life and her achievements and where she came from and her relationship. And it's so much to cover. How much research did this take? And like, what was your prep for this in terms of interviews? And how do you boil an ocean like that?
So I guess, well, I mean, once myself and Cormac Hargadon from Lead Source decided that we were going to approach Mary with the concept for the documentary. I mean, I basically bought every her memoir, Everybody Matters, or every authorized and unauthorized biography that I could find, and just started reading. I still have them all beside my bed. It's like, when am I going to move these and move on? But yeah, so it just, I just read through all of them, and you choose kind of the aspects that you think most encapsulate a career. I mean, for me, you could have ended. I mean, you could have ended the film at when she was elected president, for example, or you could have ended it much earlier. But that wouldn't be true to Mary. I think for her, climate justice, even though she came to it very late, is she really regards this as the defining battle of her life. She talks about the fact that she didn't make any speeches about it as president. She didn't make any speeches about it as UN High Commissioner. But, so she only came to it when her grandson was born. But, that it is for her kind of the battle to end all battles. So it was really important to include, her kind of ongoing her ongoing battle around climate justice. So that was it. So there was always going to be a contemporary strand. We had this extraordinary family footage which had never been seen before, and that was just such a beautiful insight into her childhood and her family life with Nick. And so it was just about interweaving that, and we had wonderful editors, and just it was a long edit. Actually, it was a long process of boiling it down, and there were aspects of the story that I would have loved to spend more time on. So we cut a scene around the introduction of the Eighth Amendment, which was really tough. Actually, I mean, we still have references to reproductive rights throughout, but it's a relatively long documentary as is. So we cut scenes around the Eighth Amendment. We ended up cutting down the presidential campaign quite a bit. I'm sure lots of people who were around at that time, or political anoraks, would be horrified at the amount of time that we spent, for example, on her on the opposition candidates, on Austin Curry and Brian Lenihan.
That was so funny. Like, because I think it just epitomized all the cliches of the era. So that, like, honestly, like everyone was just knotted laughing at the hubris. Like he's almost like a kind of character in a Father Ted episode, and moments of it as well. And I think to set that up, because I think as well, like it goes so heavy in beats. Because again, like the work that she did in the UN, there's so much weight to it, that levity really like serves as a joy. And again, where we were culturally and politically at that time is so oppressive that like there are moments of like joy and silliness that was really powerful to watch, because you're taken on such an up and down journey.
Great. I'm delighted that came off.
In terms of getting access to all that footage. Okay, so I presume her family footage was great, but and easy through her family to access. But in terms of getting access to all that news coverage, the UN coverage, like how expensive was that to license, and hard to clear all the rights?
We had incredible archive researchers, and including the really under the extraordinary guidance of Claire Strong, the Emmy award-winning Claire Strong, who she's the producer on The Farthest. She's extraordinary. So we basically had a dedicated archive team, and they did extraordinary work. And so we'd sit in, Claire and the team would go through a trawl of what was available globally, and and I just had to kind of sift through it, but it was amazing. I mean, we had a dedicated team, and the work that they did was extraordinary.
And in terms of interviews and coverage, I know this in the Q&A, you mentioned that it was tough to get her husband to sit down, and then he was great, like 'cause he was so warm.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most beautiful, like for me, I think that was one of the most beautiful parts of the documentary is that like non-traditional but supportive and warm relationship in a time where patriarchal structures were so deeply in place. And here's like a kind of free creative spirit, a partner to a powerful, strong, but like humble woman, and how, it doesn't fit that patriarchal structure, like that was so deeply embedded at the time, and but yet was so powerful and emotionally supportive, and was really there when, like, for all those tough moments, and was so proud. Like it was just so, I think, refreshing and beautiful to watch on screen, because you do just get a sense, because like, I mean, part of me is going like, how do you do this with children, or like how do you have something that's so all encompassing and travels so much, and then you just go, oh wow, like that's like an unprecedented relationship for that time.
Yeah, and I mean, like there was, I mean, Nick, I mean, if you think about how he was portrayed, for example, in, at times in the media, there was a lot of fun poked at Nick, because he was this kind of, this first husband figure, this kind of supportive partner, this person, as he talks about, walking several paces behind. And so I really wanted to, to convey the realities of that relationship, and how, they really were a duo. He was hugely supportive of her, and she was equally reliant on him.
Yeah, and but I think it just shows a strength of
Yeah.
character, a strength of think not to be like like insecure or emasculated. Like it's a power and it's a confidence that I think, and it makes sense. Like it's a dynamic that I think from the outside you don't see, but you can see like it's just equals,
Yeah.
and there's support being given there, because like he understands that role is important, and the role of caring for a family is as important, and then they work on it together and can achieve so much more. And I think, like, again, for that time, even for this time, even for like today, people in their 30s, that is still like impressive. Uh,
Absolutely.
when you think of like how the domestic load is traditionally shared and is still shared based on gender, right? And it's done so deftly. It's woven throughout the whole narrative of what's happening on this bigger scale. You definitely talk about this warts and all moment where like she maybe went into a bad situation. Can you talk to me about approaching, and I kind of, I know we're getting too into the document. I don't want to give too many spoilers. I mean, it's not a secret or anything like that. But talk to me about approaching maybe subjects that weren't. Is that something you'd have a discussion with her first, that you're going to how do you build trust in order to kind of cover those less favorable aspects?
I think it's different. I mean, so it's different if you're doing a biopic of a very public figure who is still in the public eye. And so, like if it's someone who's not in the public eye, if it's kind of a private individual, the approach would be very different, insofar as with Mary, we just put it in the pitch, we said, like, the pitch was, we're going to include everything. Do you know that, you'll answer questions about not completing the term, for example, and we included the kind of the case or the saga of Princess Latifa Al Maktoum right up front in the proposal. It wasn't something that I necessarily, I mean, for political figures, there's accountability. If you're going to be in the public eye, if you're going to be, a public representative, in whatever capacity, there is an onus, to answer questions. And Mary absolutely appreciated and respected that. She said that she derived, great closure from, I mean, it wasn't about justifying the fact that she didn't complete her term, but kind of explaining the pressure that she felt that she was under. She's very clear that she still regards it as a mistake, but I think there was some catharsis in talking about kind of her own experience of that. I think she finds talking about the Princess Latifa incident very challenging, so I suppose it's commendable that she was willing to do it, but we were very kind of explicit right from the get-go that that was the intention.
editing something like this down as part of the process. So I really wanted to talk about like time frames in terms of like the people that you got access to was phenomenal. Like I presume it was a really, because you're working with some hefty schedules there and going to some interesting places. Can you talk to me about like landing names like that, of the time frame of the documentary, putting it all together then?
So we began shooting the documentary. So we'd hoped to, the intention was to start in 2020, and obviously we were delayed then by the pandemic. But I mean, like in actual fact, we were still really only in development when we filmed 12 hours of interview footage with Mary. So she was very, very gracious about that. There was no question that she refused to answer. She was very giving of her time. I had time for every single question that I wanted to ask, and really kind of nothing was off the table. So that was in 2020.
And before that, a rapport had been built. So you had given her the pitch. Like, had you guys met a couple of times casually to kind of break that down? Or is it a case of like her calendar is so booked, this was harder?
So Cormac, so she had met with the producer Cormac, but she hadn't met with me. So yeah, so we didn't meet until that first interview, which is great in a way, because you kind of it's a good way, I think, to begin with in this kind of scenario. I mean, like it is, again, it's different approaching a political figure. And so I generally do all of my own research, and I would meet contributors several times before we do an interview. But this, so this was different. Obviously the exigencies of Mary's schedule and everything meant that we hadn't met, so we just got straight down into it. And I like asked over a period of days, we had several interviews, and she just she answered everything. But Peter Gabriel and Richard Branson were accessible to us because they had been involved with the elders. So again, it was about, figuring out their schedules. And yeah, we just, we met them in London and interviewed them in London. And I think we had 15 minutes per interview with them, but it was great to get them. Christiana Figueres, then I interviewed her. That was a remote interview. So she was in Boston and I was in Dublin, because it was literally a case of, I think half an hour in her schedule emerged, and it was just a case of we just had to send a crew out immediately and get it what we could.
And did you hire a remote, like a regional crew in Boston, or did you send people? Is it?
No, we got a crew in, but it was really kind of it was all very last minute. Like there wasn't enough time for me to fly out, so we got a crew that had worked that we'd worked with before, and so and that was all wonderful. So I directed remotely, so I could see the camera, I could see through the viewfinder, and I could see the framing and all that kind of stuff. So it was fine. It was great. So it was amazing. But it was, I mean, we traveled with her to Rwanda, and she discussed her relationship with Paul Kagame and her kind of attitude to how she approaches kind of dealing with kind of somewhat controversial kind of global figures. And the fact that as Nelson Mandela put it, we don't make peace with our friends, we make peace with our enemies. And she's very pragmatic in that regard. I mean, I think she says again and again that she'll speak to anyone.
The edit process then. So you had so much footage to put together. Is this something you're splicing as you go? Is this something you're structuring it around that initial interview and using that as a template? Did anything shift temporarily, like time-wise? Did anything shift? Like, I mean, I know you kind of start at the end and then kind of like go back to the beginning, which is a lovely bookend as a structure. Like, was that always in place? Were these things that you found?
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, we wanted to kind of interweave, I suppose, the past and the present. But yeah, I mean, definitely scenes moved around in the edit. Absolutely. I think Rwanda would have moved around a little bit in the chronology. And yeah. So definitely, I mean, it was a long edit because there was a lot to incorporate. And we ended up working with two, so there was kind of another phase of filming. So we worked with Wonga Stinsmore and with Paul Mullen, who just the edit was just a really fantastic process, and what they brought to the work was, extraordinary. So yeah, but just by definition, because there was so much footage and so much archive, so many hours and hours of interviews, that it was a longer edit than I've ever done before. Yeah, but we're delighted with it.
With such a warm reception. So people, I think it really touches people, because I think it's such a visceral exploration of Ireland, like basically being a kind of very insular, conservative, third world country to like existing in this big international sphere and punching well above our terms of weight and changing and ideologies changing. Like it seems to really deeply resonate with people. Can you talk to me about what the reaction has been like so far after preview screenings and a premiere in Galway? That was a nice returning home for her to the West.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So there were screenings in Galway. The premiere was at the Galway Film Fleadh, which is, a really special place for me as well. 1 Million Dubliners premiered there, and it was, so it was really wonderful to be back in Galway, and the response was extraordinary. I think, yeah, it was beyond anything we could hope for. I think, like, it was just, it was great to be in that room, to watch it in that room, to hear the laughter, and people, the people were emotional at times. It's amazing. I mean, and at the end of a very long process, you do feel that remove at times from the material. So just, watching it with an audience was wonderful. And I I don't always enjoy watching films with an audience, because, it's just a completely different experience. I mean, you feel like you're just watching your own mistakes, but it was like actually the emotion, the response of the audience was so, yeah, it was just so overwhelming that it was amazing. And I think, Mary really enjoyed it. She's she talks about the fact that she didn't want to make a documentary in the first place, but I think she has really loved actually talking about it and talking about the process, and actually I think she really feels the purpose of it now, and through watching other people respond to it, I think that she just felt it would be a process of kind of talking about herself, and then it might be like, I don't know, hagiographical, or, fawning, and, she didn't, or maybe some sort of act of narcissism on her part. So she was definitely quite reluctant. But she talks about, the fact that her advisor and, right-hand woman, Bride Rosny, really convinced her to take part, and, she's glad she did now.
It's definitely something I think that's so enjoyable to watch with an audience, because that was one of, like, it is very cinematic, it's very powerful, it takes you on a journey, but really it's the shared experience that I particularly enjoyed about that, because you can hear like what's tickling people, it's almost like looking back at a home video of ourselves as a nation, as a people, which is really powerful collectively. So like that's why I'd heartily encourage people to go out and get a ticket in cinemas now.
I love that idea, the home of the nation. It's a beautiful image, Gemma.
Oh, but thank you so much for chatting with us. We're thrilled for you.
It was wonderful, and I've just so much affection for Film Ireland now. I've written a few articles, generally at 4 a.m. like last minute, just before I'm about to run off on a shoot or something. So yeah, love the magazine. Wonderful. So thanks for having me.
Oh, we love them. Thank you so much, and good luck. So make sure to get your tickets now online. So in the description of this podcast, we've included links to Aoife's print interview with Rishtard O'Donnell about his award-winning documentary The Pipe, as well as her chatting to us about her previous films 1 Million Dubliners and Strange Occurrences in a Small Irish Village. So make sure to keep up to date with our upcoming events and podcasts and reviews by subscribing to our newsletter now at filmireland.ie.